You will be remembered as the king who sacrificed his life for nothing. For the Alliance.
Hello, this is Chris Brett from Eurogamer, joined by Tom Chilton, the game director for World of Warcraft. And let's start with some real talk.
All right.
They're properly dead, right? You've killed them. Like, you're sure about that? That actually happened.
It did happen. And we think it's important to be able to move the story forward in ways that feel very meaningful. It's important that we both develop characters, but it's also important sometimes that we let go of them.
Yeah, sure. It definitely feels like on the Alliance side of that, it's like a new generation will come into it. Horde is sort of maybe more of a parallel shift, I guess.
Yeah.
Horde, I'm a Horde player, kind of conflicted about what happened, because on one hand, I play the Forsaken, Sylvanas, she's my girl, like that's, I'm delighted you're giving her a shot. But Vol'jin had like 5 to 10 minutes in the big chair before he got killed off. I kind of feel sorry for the guy.
It's actually been a couple of years now,
Yeah, I guess.
But certainly, Vol'jin was a great character too, and he's a character that filled his role and I think did it well. But again, I think the story has to move on.
Yeah, of course.
And now it's Sylvanas' time.
When you made that decision to kill the two faction leaders, like, it's part of you thinking like, well, if we're doing this to the Horde, it feels a bit unfair. So we're like, the Alliance is going to have to see something similar happen, or is like, do you just feel like the right moment for both characters?
No, it felt like the right moment for both characters. Certainly, the Varian aspect of it was, I think, was sort of where we started off with initially.
I mean, the cinematic. It did sort of suggest, like he's writing a letter to his son. He's like, if I don't come back, I just want you to know, etc.
Right.
So that one kind of felt like it was coming, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. And that's one where we felt like, while at the same time we lose Varian, at least he's able to go down in history as having been what he was. There's no chance for him to screw it up now, right?
Yeah. The pre-expansion event, this is the biggest one you've ever done. Like we've seen sort of the kind of Scourge invasion. We saw something sort of similar with like the entire world being impacted by an event that was going to lead it into like thematically into the next expansion. But we haven't seen it quite as big as this before.
Yeah, it's definitely a goal that we set out with. We felt like we weren't really happy with how we delivered on the pre-expansion events for Warlords. We felt like there could have been a stronger build-up into the expansion, and we wanted to make sure that the pre-expansion events were something that we put really good amount of energy into for Legion. So we're really happy with the way that's played out. It's definitely the most we've ever done for a pre-expansion event. There's certainly a lot of inspiration that we drew from our Scourge invasions. But it's like the 2016 version of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think this is set a precedent now then for like your plans when you're leading up to expansion? It's not just about making the intro to the expansion itself when it launches, a big kind of world event,
right?
Like Dark Portal opening, etc. Like also in the sort of run up to that, now you want to have a more significant kind of build up.
Yeah, I think that it's something that we certainly plan to continue for the next expansion. It's always hard to say well beyond that. Maybe we end up doing expansions in a very different way off in the future. So maybe it ends up not making sense. But as it currently stands, we're really happy with the way this is working out and plan to do it at least for the next one.
How much does that take away from what you're kind of planning for the introduction to the expansion? Because it does sort of feel like it's already started now. Like it feels like Legion is is here.
Yeah, which I think that's very cool for the people that are currently engaged with the game. And yet at the same time, once Legion actually launches, there's so much new stuff, and the storyline really continues and evolves that even then that's still going to feel like another beginning.
Right.
So I feel good about how even for the person that buys the game on August 30th, it's still going to feel like an amazing, epic series of events. They haven't really missed anything.
Okay.
Especially since even if you just start playing on August 30th, you're still going to play through all these kind of events where you play through the Broken Shore and you see, what happens to Varian and Vol'jin and all that sort of stuff.
So that will always be there. It's not like a timed
right. It doesn't really go away.
Okay.
So that's still going to happen as something that you experience the first time you play through the expansion.
How do you keep like the timeline for that stuff? Like obviously, characters like Varian in particular have such an influence on previous expansions and the story that goes along with that. And there are going to be players that, play through that now, starting fresh.
Right.
How do you keep it so the world makes sense, even though there are multiple?
Well,
kind of
that is very
stories at the same
challenging,
time?
and we certainly ran into that. The biggest kind of weird part about that was actually with the Cataclysm in terms of how you sort of loop back in time, where you're playing Cataclysm zones, and those happen after the Burning Crusade.
Yeah, but you've already played through it.
Yeah. So there are definitely things that can be odd like that. Warlords of Draenor, we had to deal with the had to deal with Outland still being out there, and then Draenor, of course. And what happens with the Dark Portal, and how do which one do you see? Do you see the one that goes to Outland, and
or
do you see the one that goes to Draenor? And that depends on what level you are. So there are always some little things that we have to adjust to keep things from breaking. Certainly, it doesn't really make sense to redo all of the world every single time to adjust to the current continuity. But I think you have to do it enough to make it continue to make sense. Make very surgical changes to make sure things work.
I know, even from my group of friends, we've seen a bunch of older players that have sort of checked out World of Warcraft come back for this kind of stuff, because it feels like, in terms of being there when the faction leaders are killed off is a big moment. Have you seen that already, pre-expansion?
Oh, certainly, yeah. And there's typically with any expansion there's a return of former players. There are a lot of players that kind of know they're going to play the new expansion. They'll get to max level, maybe they'll do some stuff, and then they'll wait for the next one.
Sure.
And we feel like that's totally fine. Certainly with this expansion, we are seeing a larger run up than what we've seen really with any previous expansion. So it's definitely exciting to see that. Part of what makes that so awesome is a huge part of World of Warcraft is playing with your friends. And if your friends aren't there, it's not as compelling as if they are there. And so it's awesome when people come back and you log in, your friends list has a lot of your old buddies that you haven't seen in a long time. So that's really cool, and glad that's happening again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned there that with the expansions, there's a number of players that come back and sort of want to play through the story content, and that's cool. That's what they want from the game. They treat it a bit differently than they maybe did in the past. Is that something you're concerned about? Are you okay with players doing that, or are you worried about the idea that you're not holding on to them kind of for the length of the expansion?
Certainly we want to entertain players as much as we possibly can, but we have to be okay with the fact that for some people their lives change, and some people they want to go and do other things, play other games or whatever, and that's cool. I mean, we don't want people to play WoW if they're no longer enjoying it, right? Because that just leads to people being kind of bitter and angry and looking back on the game, without the sort of positivity that we would want. Inevitably that ends up happening sometimes still. Sometimes people play the game for much longer than they really should. But I think that what's great about WoW is that there are always opportunities to kind of re-engage with the game, for somebody to say, you know what, I haven't played it in a couple of years and I really miss WoW, and come back, and there's a lot of new stuff for them to do, and it's an awesome experience. And so, certainly we have a great amount of content for Legion that we feel like can hold players for longer than any other expansion that we've made. But history will decide whether or not that's the case.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of going on from that, for the set of players that do it, like the large, very dedicated set of players that World of Warcraft is their primary game. It's what they play on a kind of daily basis. With Warlords of Draenor, towards the end, it felt like the patches and the major content additions sort of slowed down, and I think those players in particular were disappointed by that.
Right.
Is that something you feel you're going to address with Legion? Is
absolutely.
A conversation?
Yeah, I mean, we are absolutely, we don't feel like we did a good enough job of delivering content past Warlords of Draenor. We feel like we need to do better than that.
Right.
And it really is for those fans that want to be playing the game and want to be entertained by the game. We need to do a better job of providing them with more consistent content. We certainly, when we were wrapping up on Warlords, we turned too much of our attention toward creating Legion.
Yeah, sure.
And spent too little of our resources on creating continued patch content. Part of that was because we really were shooting for Legion to come out around a year after Warlords did. Clearly that didn't happen, and so that made that gap much longer than what we would want in terms of patch content to launch the next expansion. So with our next expansion, we're not being anywhere near as aggressive about the timeline for it, and we're putting a huge amount of energy into the patch content for Legion. We feel great about the patch content that we have lined up. Not only do we have a bunch of substantial patches with raids and all that kind of stuff that players typically expect, we also have a lot of smaller content patches that we expect to come in between the bigger ones.
Sure.
That will deliver content that's still entertaining to players, things like players remember things like the Brawler's Guild, things like that. Other game systems, other types of content like world quests and story quests and things like that. So we feel really good about what the patch content is going to be like for Legion, and hopefully players will experience that and hopefully they'll agree.
So is it fair to say that there will be at least the plan will be that there'll be a slightly long wait between expansions, but that what happens during that wait will be more consistent?
Right. Yeah, we're no longer shooting to have the next expansion out within a year or anything like that. So we felt like we have the team is a really good size right now. We don't want to really grow it significantly beyond what it is right now, and it's creating content at a very good pace. They've really learned a lot through the creation of the last several expansions as we sort of grew the team, and they're hitting a really good stride. Feel great about the quality of stuff. Now I think we just want to really support Legion very well and make sure that players feel like it was an awesome expansion.
Cool. So what is the perfect way to handle an expansion from your point of view? Like if you, in terms of content patches or like the when and how you introduce raids or a new battleground or whether do you have an idea of what an expansion should achieve?
Right. Well, it sort of depends on what type of content, right? Because different content lasts different amounts of time. Like we find that a really good sized raid, let's say a raid that has around 10 bosses or so, can last about 5 months before it starts to feel like, okay, we want something new. But other types of content aren't really like that and don't last as long, and you need to refresh them more often. So what matters for the patch cadence is that you are delivering different types of content, but at the right times. Like I don't actually think it would be good to deliver a 10 boss raid every 2 to 3 months. Sure. Like it would actually be kind of overwhelming. Right? You wouldn't be done with the last one. It would sort of, I think a lot of guilds would actually stop raiding because they would feel like, well, we can't keep up anyways. There's no point. Forget it, right? And so that's not good. So there's a right timing for each different kind of content, and I think we're going to be doing a much better job of hitting that. I think the most challenging one for us to solve is always the last one before the next expansion.
Right. Okay.
Because there's such a huge focus shift to working on the expansion where we wrap up that last one, and man, there's still a lot of stuff to do before that expansion is launched. Because as you can tell with the launch of Warlords of Draenor or the amount of content that's in Legion, it's a huge amount of content, and so it takes a massive shift of focus to get that done and wrap it up and make it all really good.
I guess with things like the pre-expansion invasion, like that, that is sort of a historic moment for World of Warcraft. People will look back on that, and the reception to it, like over the last week and a bit, has been very, very strong. But I guess when you think about the amount of the work that goes into a raid and the kind of lifespan that has, the invasion stuff, it's for these like 3 weeks, right? Like,
right.
Is it tough, like committing the resources to something like that when you know,
right,
like time wise,
that
gives you
away.
3 weeks and for your subscribers?
It is sometimes, and certainly that's why we've struggled with it in the past, right? Where we've had different expansions with different degrees of launch events.
Yeah.
And what we found is that it's still important for it to feel like a meaningful event, and so there's this kind of minimum amount of energy that you have to put into it for it to feel like it was worthy of being a pre-expansion event. And
sure.
and when we've tried to do less in the past because the content's just going to last for a couple weeks anyways, it just ends up feeling like, why did you even do it if you're not going to do it well enough? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, all of our content we kind of know expires in a way.
Yeah.
Obviously people still play raids deep into the future, just to go back to old raids,
sure.
stuff like that, get transmogs, all that. So it still gets used, but content still has sort of a lifespan for when it's really entertaining the bulk of the audience, and we just have to be okay with that and move on and make new stuff.
Sure. Is it strange looking back at past expansions in terms of the amount of work and time that players invested into them, and now they're sort of trips along your leveling experience to get to Legion or whatever it is. Like, how do you? Because you guys have been making World of Warcraft for a real long time now.
Right.
Looking back at that, and I guess one day you'll look at Legion in a similar way.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? Do you ever see that experience changing?
I think that as we go on, we'll actually find ways to keep those more relevant.
Right.
In a lot the same way that we do with Dungeons with time walking.
Yeah.
Right. I think that there will be opportunities to do that with older raids, particularly now that we've really sort of developed our scaling technology to scale things by level and difficulty and all that sort of stuff, number of players. That those just weren't things that we had 10 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the current model that we have was sort of the only model that was realistically going to work. But now that we've developed more and more of these sort of scaling systems, it gives us a lot of opportunities to do cool things with some of the older content. So hopefully we'll be able to do some of that and really kind of evolve the way that our content gets used in the long run, so that it feels like that stuff doesn't just get, go away all the time.
Sure. Like in Legion, you're talking about doing sort of you're generating world quests that like a huge number of them, and which will encourage players to go to like zones which they may not have been to since they began expansion, that kind of stuff.
Right. And
is
it's
it
really
it
is, and because the scaling tech that we have now really allows us to use the world like that. In the past, it's like, okay, well, if you were, let's say, Wrath of the Lich King, and you were in the Borean Tundra was created for characters that were level 70 to 72, and then after that, it's like we could isolate little pockets of it. That okay, this little point of interest will be used for max level.
You might go there for like
that
the fishing
one.
daily.
Yeah, exactly. So it was hard to leverage most of the world that way. It's awesome now, that we're able to do that, and I can imagine us starting to leverage other places from prior expansions or from classic WoW. If we kind of adapt them to using scaling, then it'll give us the opportunity for players to really experience the world as a whole a lot more than they've been able to for a long time now.
That sounds excellent. Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and looking forward to the rest of this invasion nonsense and also the launch itself. So,
definitely.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You must be willing to fight.